So it really is a true pleasure for me to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Catania. Jeff and I go back a bit. I'm going to tell you a little bit of detail. I think he's going to tell you something about himself as well. His first career was actually as a computer engineer, and then he decided to go into education. And his focus was in physics, math, and computer studies, but eventually he moved into a leadership position with the program department of the Halton District School Board. And that is where I met Jeff. I was across the hall in student services, and I had the opportunity to work with him on a few projects where I kind of pulled him in for his expertise. I really always admired Jeff's ability to look at issues. He had tremendous insight. He had a tremendous calmness about him when it came to problem solving and coming up with different ideas. And he also has a tremendous wit. You have to listen carefully, folks, because it's hidden, but it's there. It's a great wit. He's giggling because he knows it. Jeff has also written quite a few books, 4 to be exact, and I think there might be a 5th one in the wing. And his first book, I'm going to read them here because I can't possibly remember all the names. His first book was called The Joy of X, Becoming a Mathematics Teacher, because that was his focus, one of his focuses. And then he was a contributing author to the second book, which was Talk About Assessment, and it really focused more on the high school area, high school strategies and tools. The third book that he wrote was Rebooting Assessment. He actually co-authored that with Damien Cooper. Many of you may have heard Damien's name mentioned before. And that book actually won the IBPA Ben Franklin Gold Medal for Best Book in Education in 2023. And his most recent book is called Flourishing Classrooms, a deep dive into proactive wellness for grades 7 to 12. But in conversation with Jeff, he has shared with me that many of the strategies that are in that book can be adapted to be used in the younger settings. And in fact, that's the book that I was referring to as being a possible 5th book. He's going down into the lower grades. We have actually secured 9 copies of Jeff's book that we are going to be giving away as door prizes. And then Jeff has also brought other copies. If you're not one of those lucky winners and you would like to purchase one of his books, he has copies here that you can purchase tonight. Jeff retired from teaching in 2019. And when he's not writing books, he has his own company, which I asked him, do you pronounce it alove or alove? He said either, but its origins is in alive. And he runs wellness sessions, he does community circles, group retreats, mindfulness series, restorative practices, and other workshops as well. When I connected with Jeff to talk to him about coming tonight, we talked a lot about the various issues that are in education today. Violence in the classroom was one of the things that I talked to him a lot about. Disrespect from many fronts. And just the overall feeling right now, and Shade touched on this when she spoke to initially, as to what teaching is becoming and how teachers are beginning to feel. And so he was a perfect match to discuss our well-being. And so he's going to speak to us about how and why we need to put proactive and upstream and holistic well-being at the heart of public education. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jeff has to say about this. And would all of you please join me in welcoming Jeff to the stage.
I feel real mixed emotions being here because I spent my whole career in education, and actually I think I've been in every single Halton school, like maybe some of you have. And I know that it's a stressful time. It's really tough. I have a friend who just did a very courageous thing. He was at Prince of Wales for a long time, which is a really tough urban school in Halton. And last year, he took up 0.6 and a mental health lead. And all those colleagues were like, I wish I had the guts to do that. He just went back this week, and 3 people just resigned. One was bitten, one was kicked. There's just a lot of stress for people, and it's so hard. I think also there's a lot of stress in the world. I mean, we've got this social progress index that's been going gangbusters for so long, and recently it's kind of stagnated. We have things over decades that we've gained that are being rolled back. The democracy index was going great, and now the United States is a flawed democracy, and we have this kind of stagnation there. So I feel this whole mix of belonging and familiarity, like I'm a family, but also stress because it's education. And yet there's this massive hope too, because I feel the solution to all of it is in front of me. In fact, your personal thriving and flourishing is completely wrapped up in that too, because it's the same thing. And I'm going to try in the next, well, I was given half an hour, but we'll see how we do. In the next 25 minutes or so to show you why and how I think this is true. Thanks, Grant, for doing the land acknowledgement. So we're going to explore some wellness activities. A lot of these are from the book. Like Terry said, they're adaptable for all grades, post-secondary. Really, wellness starts with you, and it just spreads out from everyone. It's very social. And this first one, it's on the handout. I've got a handout at every table. You can take a look. It's up to you whether you participate. Some of you may be ready or not, and it's completely optional. But I invite you to try some of these activities. And the first one I call Taking Refuge. I love this activity because I used to use it a lot. Every time I went through a door, whether I was going to a class or walking in the hallway, I would just take a deep breath. And it was just such a respite for me. And there's all these different havens, and choice is so important because we have to have trauma-informed classrooms. You have to give people choice and on options to participate. If you decide to do this activity with students or anyone else, definitely participate with them. But I'll just invite you now to just settle in and actually look out the window and take a look at the beautiful grasses and the sky and just rest in seeing. Don't put any effort into thinking. Just let your awareness be a river of seeing for a bit and see how that feels to you. And now close your eyes and just rest in listening. There's a little bit of rain falling actually. And see if you can become listening. Actually just rest in a stream of sound. And notice how that feels. And now feel your body. The chair, the temperature of the air on your skin. What's the experience of just becoming feeling for a few seconds? And lastly, you can notice your breath. Watch your body breathe. With no need to change it and no energy needs to go into thinking about it. But how is it to become breathing just for a moment? And if you come back now, I think you'll notice a very different quality that's there. A little bit more awareness, a bit more spaciousness, a bit more equanimity. And that place is where you now go into your next moment. And hopefully carry that to whatever you're going to do. And this is fantastic because it's micro-mindfulness. It's in the research, micro-mindfulness has a lot of the same benefits as formal practice, but it just happens in little hits throughout the day. The trouble is remembering to do it. I do workshops where give people these strategies and they come back 2 weeks later, how'd it go? Oh, I completely forgot. I just went out of the door and I was completely lost in myself. And so I want to give you a few cues to help you remember. And there's 3 life cues that can help you do these little taking refuge. The first one is just something that you do all the time without thinking about it. So I want you just to think to yourself right now, is there something you do every day, and anytime, maybe check your phone, check the time, walk through a door, look at a notification. That's going to be your cue to take refuge. And the second one is, I want you to think of something that's mildly challenging, not super stressful, just something that's kind of annoying, maybe the weather or traffic or something that's kind of been bugging you and keeps coming up for you. That becomes a doorway to take refuge. And the third one is something you can change. So like moving a watch from one arm to the other, or writing a little happy face on your hand. I've got pens on the tables too, so if you want to take notes or make a little happy face on your hand right now. I used to keep a sticker on my phone, and every time I looked at it, I'd be like, oh yeah. Maybe this like deep taking refuge. And it was a real haven. It became like a haven for me, just resting in my own awareness. So this is my life play for you. you is to like try these different cues, and whenever they come up, whether it's tonight and during the session or later, to see if you can take refuge and carry that with you into your life. I also run support groups for trade partners, and I use this activity with them. All these activities are in the handout. There's like 140 activities in the book. I tried to pick some that would be just useful for tonight. I like this one because there's so many people who come to the group and they're really struggling. They're on this healing journey, and I ask them to draw, like, what is your journey looking like? And you can do this now if you want. I'm not going to ask anyone to share their lifeline. This is a high trust activity. But when they do, they want it to be like this, right? We want to have this smooth, uphill, perfectly steady growth where everything just gets better and better, right? But that is not reality. I'm going to share my lifeline now, and this is kind of what most people's lifeline looks like. Where you have these magical teaching learning moments in there, as Brene Brown calls them, their spiritual breakthrough, which is AKA a nervous breakdown. And that's the reality, but the roller coaster may go up and down, but it's always going forward. And one of the big things I learned from researching this book is the power of challenge to actually contribute to our thriving. Not in the sense of enduring it. And there's these great curricula in the US where they teach kids resilience, and that's fantastic. And we should never expect any child to overcome a barrier that's unjust. We have to take an anti-oppressive stance. But when there is a challenge, and inevitably we'll all be facing some of you are facing big ones right now, there's ways to thrive and flourish in those challenges. I want to talk about one of mine. It happened at Tecumseh Public School. I was a little kid, and these two older grade 8 kids decided they were going to beat me up every day and throw things at me and pull me down. And this went on for a while. Trauma is subjective, but for me, it was horrible. And there was no anti-bullying back then. But finally, my teacher figured it out. And we went to the principal's office. I remember Mr. Ledbetter, this is in 1979, so for those of you that aren't aware, this is where the years have a 1 in front of them. So no anti-bullying, no restorative practices. But corporal punishment had been that's done. So no more corporal punishment. And Mr. Ledbetter, he was a World War II veteran. I remember when we got to Canada, he'd stand at attention with his thumb down the side of his pants. He was very proud. He was a very disciplined person. And when he found out this had been happening in his school, he was so upset. And we were in the office, and I can't remember what happened then, but he just marched us all outside. And he started just yelling at these two boys. He made them do push-ups and run to the fence and back. And it was like, wow. I don't know what was worse, the bullying or him bullying them. But what I took from it though was just his frustration and his compassion that he wanted to do something he didn't know what to do. That was the best he could do. He was just trying to make it better for me. And I don't think, I grew a lot from that. There wasn't a lot of growth, but some seeds were planted that later resulted in some massive growth. Later, that big, giant ball of devastation, that was when I found out I'd been betrayed really badly in my marriage. And for a couple of years, I remember going to therapy and joining support groups and reading books. And there was this whole world of wellness I never knew about, that I'd never been taught about, like emotional well-being and healing and how to have healthy relationships and communication and mindfulness and all these wonderful things. And the biggest one was actually connecting with people deeply, actually being vulnerable and sharing. And I started running a support group, and everything before that time was kind of and Grant will remember, it was IT, e-learning, and math. That was my role. And then after that, it was mindfulness, restorative practices, and well-being. Everything changed for me. And I realized at the heart of it all was this huge question of just, why had nobody ever taught me any of these things at school? Why did I have to figure this out when I was in my mid-40s, in the middle of a big crisis? Which was wonderful, because it was the best thing ever. I look back and think that was the most fantastic time, because it led to me being here, actually. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't had that experience. So if you're going through something really hard, take heart that there's flourishing in that. Which brings me from Lifelines to the purpose of life, and my first multiple choice question for this group, because we're teachers. But what's the purpose of life? And it kind of surprised me that wellness is not really up there. I see some other things that might be there, like money. But we see the impact of individual greed, wealth inequity, nations using GDP as a measure of outcome rather than social justice. And so we go to fame, right? And when I was in grade 10 teacher, I'd ask my students, what do you want to be? And they'd say athlete, rock star, like something they've seen on TV, like that was LA law, so a lawyer. And now they say they want to be an influencer. They want to be a TikToker or a YouTuber. It's still that thing that Lady Gaga said, you know, fame is a tomb. Power? Well, we've seen some, I could mention a few names of abuse of power and how, you know, we've got this massive inequity and what that's done for us. Not to say these things don't bring some good wellness to our life. Hey Tim, I just like you. Recent study just showed that we actually improve our happiness up to $500,000 of income. After that, it doesn't really matter. It used to be about 80,000, so the number's gone up because of inflation. Maybe it is just happiness. We need some pleasure and hedonic well-being in our life, and that's important. But there's this thing called a hedonic treadmill where when you get something good happening, you tend to reset back to your basic level of happiness after a short while. Most happiness tends to be fleeting and shallow. And so we are pursuing all of the above as success in life. Pretty much that's the paradigm. And yet the pursuit of these is draining us and it's causing a great deal of unwellness. So I'd like to propose multiple choice F, which is flourishing, as the measure of success. And there's a lot of movement in this area where we have the United Nations with sustainable development goals that include wellness as a primary target for what a nation's going after. Some countries are actually adopting these outcomes of flourishing. There's research into positive psychology. School districts have well-being. Remember, Halton had a huge well-being program. Ministry had one too. It was canceled before it came in. But it's great to see. I want everyone to give a round of applause to Halton for keeping that going, that we have a well-being program. This is a new paradigm for success. It's actually to thrive and flourish in every domain of well-being and to teach it explicitly in schools from an early age. Like, what would happen if that was the case? Like, how would we be? And what are those domains? Because I didn't know what they were. And if you want to become really healthy and happy and feel like absolute joy and love in your life, just spend 6 months writing a book on wellness. I learned so much. I had to practice so much. When I was in Halton and I was leading the mindfulness, I started these mindfulness programs. And I was out there facilitating workshops with staff and students. And I learned so much by trying to be well myself, but actually share wellness with others with such a powerful personal wellness for me. And eventually I learned there was no difference. First domain is just safety, right? Essential needs and freedoms. And this includes an anti-oppressive stance in the classroom so that people can feel safe to express their identity. That is so important. We can't have any learning or flourishing without safety. But in the research, and many of you may know this, the social wellness domain is the #1 contributor to your flourishing of all the domains. It connects strongly to everyone. Relationships and belonging are everything. And I'm going to talk more about that later, so I'm not going to say much about that now. This one, eudaimonia. Who's heard of eudaimonia? Has anyone heard of this? No. You've heard of hedonia, hedonism, which is fun and pleasure? Hedonia is all the good pleasurable things. Eudaimonia is the meaningful things. Not necessarily fun, it may be really challenging. This could be fleeting and shallow. This tends to be deep and long-lasting. Eudaimonia brings such a rich, and powerful, and sustainable source of well-being. And yet, do we talk with students a lot about what is your purpose? I gave the acronym MEGA Wellness to Eudaimonia because it's about meaning, excellence, growth, and authenticity. And I think if there's one thing, I love drama teachers, by the way. Anyone teaching drama is teaching vulnerability, is teaching authenticity. I think it's a fantastic subject. Resilience, of course, not just, like I said, gritting it out, but there's this new term, anti-fragility, which is where you actually use the challenge to grow. And post-traumatic growth is a term that we're starting to see come up over and over, that people that go through traumatic experience, it's not that we want them, but that there's often a post-traumatic growth that happens. Cognitive well-being, so this is the one we tend to think of, right, like mental health. When you think of wellness, mental health comes up, but wellness is so much more than mental. It's all these domains, and our mental health tends to be, in people's minds at least, a response to unwellness, a response to disorder. We need interventions. We need to think about, there's so much going on. I'm going to show on the next slide. That's a challenge with this. But in schools, we tend to cognitively stuff kids' minds full of facts and skills. And teachers too, with procedures and information. You're kind of cognitive overload. Who is teaching staff and students how to care for your mind? To have mindfulness and self-directed neuroplasticity and what's a flow state? And how can we like cultivate those? I remember in the 70s, this guy, James Fox, I think he was a runner. And he did this cardio thing, and he wrote this book on jogging. Nobody jogged, like nobody knew what running was. And cardio suddenly became a thing, like, oh my gosh, you can run, and it really like hurts. But after a while, you start feeling better, and you have all these health benefits, and it's great, and you should exercise more. Wow, this is fantastic. And now I think in the 21st century, we're realizing, yeah, there's this cognitive jogging we can do. There's simple mindfulness practices, self-directed, like, and not just as an early age, but all through our life. Norman Deutsch, my partner's reading this book by Norman Deutsch, How the Brain Changes Itself. His research took like 15 years to be accepted because people could not accept that your brain changes all through life. They thought it was just when you're little. So that's such a huge one. And of course, emotional well-being. But who teaches this? Like, who teaches the words for emotions? In the US, over 50% of districts in the United States have mandated social emotional learning programs, which is fantastic. I know in Halton we used to have them for some self-contained classes, but this is such a massive part of well-being, and how do we teach this to ourselves and to others? Physical well-being, of course, we think of this. There's a massive epidemic of unwellness in every pillar of physical well-being. Diet, sleep, exercise, and youth and children especially are at all-time epidemic highs. And then I put this in because there's no wellness without the wellness for all life on the planet. It's all together. We have to consider how can we do well with the natural world as well. In fact, I just want to go back and read a quote from my book about the emotional one because it was so big to me when I went through that experience myself that, like, what is this whole emotional language? Like, I just felt bad or good. I had 2 words for my emotions. And then it was like angry or sad. I had 2 words for the bad ones. But there is no bad ones, ultimately. And this, what I eventually wrote in the book, was it's heartbreaking to consider that many teachers today have lived through the dawn of the information age, the unveiling of the universe, and the splitting of the heart of matter itself. Yet for all these monumental achievements, we still have only the faintest inkling of our own human hearts. When are we going to teach human beings about our own hearts, our own capacity to feel everything? And there's nothing bad about it. It makes you alive. That's why I called my website and all my stuff alove, because it's like you're alive with this like full feeling of life. You can fully embrace all the emotions, right? And it's so important to be healthy. And then spiritual well-being. Something like 85% of the world's population identifies with some religion, but other people practice spirituality in a non-secular way. Some do not, but many students and youth actually don't associate any kind of spiritual practice with a religion, but they do have a spiritual life relating to transcendence, transcending themselves through connection to nature or other people or themselves. This idea of union, not like just connection, but feeling one with things, and peace. I mean like a deep peace. That kind of peace where like everything drops away. And this is so important to acknowledge because this is people's like lived beliefs and identities, and it has to be acknowledged for their wellness in school. If you want to go to the website, and there's an alove.ca/epidemics link, you can get these slides and get all the links and stuff like that. But I made all these activities. There's 140, and I love spreadsheets still, like Grant knows. I can't help but make a good spreadsheet with all kinds of like tick marks. So if you want something that's just for social well-being and it needs to take 5 minutes or less, and you want to like have a low trust activity because you're not ready for the high trust activity, you can filter out and get the activities right there from the book. Why upstream and proactive versus downstream? So there's 2 books on the left and right. The one on the left is from the United Nations, the International Classification of Diseases. 1,344 pages of everything that can possibly go wrong with your body. On the right, we have our DSM, the American Psychological Association, has documented everything that can possibly go wrong with your mind. And we have studied for like decades everything that can go wrong. And we know it all. It's our negativity bias. But it's time to figure out what can go right. And this positive psychology movement, Martin Seligman and other researchers have put forward this whole idea of flourishing and how to teach people the proactive, holistic flourishing and thriving that is our birthright. Right? This is like, I don't mean just being like sort of like able to cope. I mean like really feeling fantastic, like full of joy, peace, and love. And this middle graph just came out from the Canadian government. So social anxiety disorder in the past decade, as the percentage of Canadians has doubled, and depression, 67% increase. So we have some major epidemics, and I think this sort of reactive system, and you think of like our healthcare system, it's more of a sickness care system. And there's some wonderful things that are going on, but we have to kind of switch to this proactive, holistic, upfront model. And that's where I think these domains come in. And whether you can like practice them yourself or in some way inculcate in school or cultivate with students, these domains, it's such a huge possible benefit to people. Just in the interest of time, we're not going to do this activity. It's on your actual handout there, but I'm going to ask you all a question. We'll kind of do it as a group. So I'm going to ask the question, and I want everyone to shout out the answer. Just speak the answer out to me. Everyone together, so it doesn't matter what you say. There we go. How are you? Now, to yourself, I want you to really respond to that question, how are you? And just feel into how you really are. And whenever you hear that question, I want you to consider, is this a greeting? Or can I take this time to actually be my authentic self right now? Can I speak my authentic truth? I remember in the midst of that one magical teaching learning moment I was sitting in the kitchen of our school programs department, and it was 2 days off in 20 years and 20 days off in 2 years. And this is one of those days where I was like, I'm not sure if I can stay. I might have to go. And someone came up and said, like, how are you? And I just cried and just told them for like 20 minutes how I was. And it was the most powerful thing to actually be able to say to someone what was really going on. And so this activity of sort of, I call it taking back, how are you? And taking it back from being a greeting and really just saying that when you really mean that you want to know the heart and mind and soul of somebody, at least some part of it. And are you willing to offer that to somebody else? Because that deep connection is the #1 source of wellness that we can have. Just to share how we are. And really in a true way, right? Not to sort of say, I'm fine. In my support group, you know what FINE stands for? Effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So, wellness doesn't have to be an add-on. It doesn't have to be Wellness Wednesday or Mindful Monday. It can be integrated into the fabric of teaching and learning, whether it's that break, that taking refuge in a break, the way that we do listening during any kind of like partner share activity. So I even have a whole keyword of all those activities. You can pick just integrated ones, so you're not adding into your classroom time, because it is so powerful. This is my favorite slide, because I was blown away by this research, and it's called the Framingham Study. It's a 30-year, multi-generational, like tens of thousands of people study into wellness. And there's a startling finding, which is that amongst all the people in this community, wellness spreads in their social network. So, #1, your wellness is improved by having social relationships. But #2, wellness flows to you through those social connections. It's not just a source, but a conduit. Up to 3 degrees of separation, even if you don't know the people, and the effects can last like a year. So just think about that for a second. All the people you know, and all the people they know, and all the people they know, all of your wellness is supporting each other. And the other good thing about this is that it only works in a positive, apparently. The flip side is not the case. Sadness does not spread through social networks nearly as well. So this is a massively inspiring and elevating finding that social connections are not just like this fuel for well-being, they're like a network through which it spreads in such a powerful way. And as teachers in the classroom with 30 students, that's 496 connections. I was a math teacher. That's a binomial. 496 possible connections. Whatever your home situation is, you have this opportunity every day with this whole group to cultivate so much well-being because you have all these social connections to work with. It's fantastic. Does anyone know who this guy is? His name is Mamoudou Gassama. You don't have to hear this video. I'm going to see if I can play it here. So, he's climbing a building because a child is hanging from a balcony there, and the fire department hasn't shown up yet. People are cheering and yelling from the streets. Some are screaming. He just decided to jump up and do this. And the neighbor actually has one hand on the child at this point. but then he pulls the child out. Wow. So he was actually a refugee from Mali, like a war refugee, and he had no job. He was actually in France without any kind of immigration papers. He did this, and Macron, the president, actually gave him citizenship, and now he's like an intern in the fire department. But when you watch that, what do you feel when you see him pull that child up? How does that feel? It's like this warmth in your heart. And this is called elevation. It's been studied a lot, but when you see something noble, something true, something good, it makes you feel so good. It makes you feel like, wow, that's heroic. And it just makes you feel like you want to do good stuff. And it has this contagious effect. And what I want to say to you is that all of you make me feel that way. Because you're pulling children up like that. Like every day in some way, in some small way. And sometimes even a more powerful way, like you might have saved that child's life, but you could be saving lives every day and never know. We can never know the outcome of what we're doing. For many, many children. And this other word, this big word, generativity, I just got to throw that in there because the number one contributor to eudaimonia in the research is generativity, which is, get this, nurturing future generations. Anyone who's in a position to nurture future generations has more capacity for eudaimonic well-being than anyone else. And so by just helping children and helping yourself feel well and having that spread, whether you actually do wellness activities or use the book or not, doesn't matter. Taking care of yourself in all those domains will spread to all the people in your social network, all the children in your class, all the people in your family, your friends, and all their friends up to 3 degrees. It's a fantastic, amazing, inspiring thing for me to think about the power that you have to actually work in this area. So I tried to keep us not too late. I think I used less than 30 minutes, so I'm happy about that. But just be well. Just focus on your own thriving and flourishing. Like I think of it like if you had an empty glass and you're trying to pour your last 2 drops into somebody else's cup, fill up your mug. Fill it up and let the stuff, the coffee, the beer, whatever, flow over the top and all over the table, and everyone gets the overflow, right? And if you want to share with others, that's fantastic. Share, right? You could just pass out, you can cut these out and pass them along. If you think somebody needs some wellness, just cut these out and pass them along. It doesn't really matter, it's the same thing. Personal, social, global, it's all one thing. And that was what really blew me away with this and I wanted to make a point of this with the book is it's not about student well-being, and sometimes you see employee wellness programs. There's no separation. We're all together with all life on the planet too. We have to think that way. So I have the book link here if you want to check it out. If you want to get a book, I've got a special deal for HEOT teachers. It's $40. Just to keep it simple, you can e-transfer or there's a thing here. I also have a sliding scale for financial need, which is all posted here, right down to $0 because I get these books at a slight discount, but I'm happy to just give them away. It's not about the money. It's about helping make wellness at the heart of public education, beside learning. In fact, to make learning and wellness synonymous. That this is the new norm for learning. So thank you for listening. Thank you for thinking about wellness, and I hope you have a wonderful dinner in 1990.
Okay, I think I'm the only thing standing now between you and dinner, so I will try to be brief if I can read my notes here. So as you may have gathered from what Jeff said, I'm Grant Davidson. I think you saw me stand up several times already. Jeff and I worked together. I had the pleasure of working with Jeff for about 8 years in school programs. And it was a continuous learning experience the whole time. And something that really struck me was Jeff said that before he got into this, everything was IT, e-learning, and math, which are things that don't sound very social, emotional. But what I noticed and what I learned from Jeff was through all of those things that he did, it was all about the people every time. We'd have these meetings and he would always be considering everybody who was involved and making sure that anybody who wasn't at the meeting was still represented in some way so that we would make the decisions that were best for everybody across the school board. And one of the things that really stood out to me is we'd be sitting in a meeting, discussions would be going on, maybe an hour or two, and then Jeff would remember and he would say, I want to go back to what so-and-so said. He remembered what people said. He paid that close attention to people and made sure that he gave credit to whoever had brought up this idea we might have been through a dozen ideas in the meantime. And the other thing I noticed about Jeff was that he was always willing to change his mind when there was good evidence to do so. So thank you very much for speaking with us tonight, Jeff. Thank you for these very important ideas that we can use for well-being for ourselves and our colleagues and our students. And I'm looking forward to reading the book now and putting it into practice. Thank you very much.